This is Edinburgh Castle, one of the oldest, biggest and most beautiful castles in the world. If the walls could tell the stories, they would have so much to tell. But luckily, I've got Gareth here. Hello, Gareth. Hi.
Good to meet you.
What is the story of this incredible castle?
So, Edinburgh Castle is the feature that marks where Edinburgh started as a city, up on top of this very high dome of rock. And this landscape here has been occupied for about 3,500 years. The oldest part of the castle that survives today is around about 900 years old. Because the castle for a long time was a major feature of the conflict between Scotland and England, the English had realised very quickly that in order to get control of Scotland, they didn't have to get right up into the furthest reaches of the Highlands. They only had to get control of this site. And whoever controlled this, by default, controlled Scotland. So over its history, the castle has changed hands between the Scots and the English something like 23 or 26 times.
But what I find fascinating is it's not just the story of this magnificent castle, which, you know, sort of glowers over the rest of the city. It's the people who've lived here, the most remarkable stories of people who are really important in history.
Really incredible Scottish figures, kings, queens, princes. The castle at one time was actually described as the Castle of the Maidens, and there's a sense of the kind of princesses in the castle that were kind of the defining feature of this whole space. And we'll talk about some of the people who have lived here and been here through the years.
As you go in, there are two glowering figures either side of the gate. Who are they?
So, on the left-hand side is King Robert the Bruce, one of the great kings of Scotland, and on the right is William Wallace, one of the great warriors of Scotland, sometimes better known as Braveheart. And what sort of people don't always appreciate is that Braveheart for a long time was actually the nickname of King Robert the Bruce. He was known as the Brave Heart. When he died, his heart was cut from his body and put into a silver casket, and it was carried on the Crusades through Europe down into the Holy Lands, and it was later returned to Scotland and buried at Melrose Abbey. It was only in the 1990s when a Hollywood screenwriter called Randall Wallace was here in Scotland tracing his family history, and he came across the nickname Braveheart, and he thought it better suited a warrior than a king. So he borrowed Braveheart and he attached it to William Wallace. But before the 1990s, Braveheart was actually Robert the Bruce.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? But that's how the Scots choose to see their heroes.
Absolutely.
What about what is said over the gateway?
So the blue ribbon has got the Latin motto of the castle and of Edinburgh in general. It translates as, "No man shall attack me with impunity," or "If you hit me, I'll hit you back," which is not only a very Scottish sentiment, it's what you'd expect of a fortress this size.
And that's the amazing thing, is that when you come to Edinburgh, you see the castle almost straight away, and it is there overlooking the whole of the city.
In fact, it's the feature that gives Edinburgh its name. The word Edinburgh means the fort on the hill. So if we didn't have this built here, we might have ended up being called something very different instead, like Glasgow, which would have been very confusing, particularly for people from Glasgow.
Yes, but this one, as I say, has so many stories to tell, so many human stories to tell. Who are the ones that you would pick out as the ones that we all know and love?
So figures like Mary Queen of Scots, one of the most iconic figures of Scottish history, has a close association with the castle. This was where she gave birth to her son, who became James VI of Scotland, later became James I of England, the first king to rule both Scotland and England together. They are both closely associated and celebrated here at the castle.
Yeah, in fact, she actually gave birth to him here in the castle.
She gave birth to him in a very small chamber just off the royal apartments up at the top. A little tiny room that's just a few feet square, and that was where James came into the world.
And then at the very top, we'll see a chapel dedicated to Saint Margaret. She wasn't just a saint, she was the Queen.
She was Queen Margaret of Scotland and later canonised and became a saint. She was the mother of several kings of Scotland. King David I was the king who established the small chapel in her name here in the castle today.
When you talk to people about the castle and its history and its amazing characters, do many people from all over the world really know those stories, or are they hearing them for the first time?
Very often people have an idea of Scotland and its history and its people, and then when they come here and they find out the reality behind some of the myths and some of the legends, I think they realise that the history is more interesting even than the mythology would give it credit for.
So how does this castle, if you like, sum up the character of the average Scot? There's no such thing as an average Scot, I'm sure. But, you know, it's like the castle is saying something about the people.
It is. It's solid. It's steadfast. It's been here independent for so long. And, of course, one of the great kind of conversations that's still being had at the moment is that idea of how Scotland relates to England in its kind of political circumstances. And this castle sort of stands as a statement of Scottish presence and Scottish kind of solidarity.
Yeah, and the Scottish military might as well. The military still has a base here inside the castle.
Absolutely. Still owned by the British Army. Of course, over many, many years it changed hands between the Scots and the English. The British Army are still the people who maintain it and have a permanent garrison based here today as well.
And over the world, people will know it for the Edinburgh Festival and the fringe of the festival and the tattoo.
Yes, so this space here at the front of the castle is where every summer they hold the Edinburgh Military Tattoo, festival of military bands from all around the world who come and take part in a huge spectacle right here at the front with the castle as the backdrop. And they use this as a backdrop for the tattoo, projecting lights and kind of exhibitions onto this. It all takes place right here at the front. So this is the oldest building in Edinburgh. This is St Margaret's Chapel. It was built by King David I of Scotland in the 1120s. It was built in honour of his mother, Queen Margaret of Scotland, who later became St Margaret of Scotland. He also built Holyrood Abbey at the farther end of the Royal Mile. So he built two of the main kind of chapel spaces and religious spaces. And this one still gets used for services, weddings, in this tiny, tiny little room.
When she was queen, wasn't she around that sort of 1066
Yeah,
era?
so she died around 11th century. She was the wife of Malcolm III of Scotland. He was known as Malcolm Bighead, Malcolm Campbell. And she was known as a very pious figure. She established a ferry across the River Forth to the north of Edinburgh for religious pilgrims going up to St Andrews, to the reliquary at St Andrews. And that ferry service ran from the 11th century right up until the 1960s, when the modern bridges were opened to provide access. And the two towns there are still called North and South Queensferry after that ferry service. She was later canonised, made a saint. She became the first Scottish saint.
I mean, what made her so special?
She had this very devout kind of life. She was dedicated to providing access to places like St Andrews. The miracle by which she was made a saint is a rather strange one, perhaps. She was apparently crossing the Forth on her ferry service with her Bible, which she carried everywhere, and the Bible fell from her pocket, fell into the water, and when it was retrieved from the water, it was bone dry. Ooh. And that was one of the miracles by which she was canonised and later made a saint.
Yeah, to be a saint, you do have to have a miracle or two attributed to you.
Certainly in those days, I think it was probably easier to get that process going, and those were one of the kind of things she had.
Did she ever lie in state here or anything like that?
She didn't, no, but one of the people who was laid here was the mother of Mary Queen of Scots, Mary of Guise.
Yes.
When she died, Edinburgh Castle at that time was being held under siege by the English, and Mary Queen of Scots is over in France, but her mother, Mary of Guise, is in Edinburgh Castle holding it on behalf of her daughter. And when she dies, because she's from France, she wants her body taken back to France for burial. Because they're under siege, they can't take her body out the front and say to the English soldiers, sorry lads, can we just bring the body of Mary Queen of Scots' dead mum through? So they keep the body of Mary of Guise in Edinburgh Castle, waiting for the siege to finish. She's wrapped in lead, she's packed in salt, and she's left here in St Margaret's Chapel waiting for the siege to finish. And as the weeks turn into months and the siege shows no sign of ending, they decide they're going to smuggle the body of Mary of Guise out under cover of darkness. And one of the records suggests that she was lowered down the cliff face of the castle rock under cover of night at the end of a rope, accompanied not by two soldiers but by two ladies' maids dangling in the darkness. And they eventually got her body back over to France for burial, but she laid here in St Margaret's Chapel in that interim period.
I mean, it is amazing, isn't it? But the various queens of Scotland have had the most incredible lives.
Incredible lives.
And deaths.
And deaths. And this is why we're still sort of fascinated by them, isn't it? That their stories still kind of evoke kind of very romantic associations or tales of sort of daring do. And even in death, they kind of inspire us.
And you must talk to a lot of people who, I mean, come from various parts of the world and who aren't aware until they get here of the incredibly close relationship between France and Scotland.
Absolutely.
Often very much stronger than Scotland just being above England.
Absolutely. And for a long time, the relationship between Scotland and France was much, much stronger than the relationship between Scotland and England.
Yes.
It goes all the way back to the 1290s when they signed an agreement that became known as the Old Alliance that basically made a common enemy of England. So Scotland and France were very, very closely aligned for a long time. Mary Queen of Scots was not just Queen of Scotland, she was Queen of France as well. We don't often think of her in that way. But for a long time, that connection between Scotland and France really was very, very solid.
Yeah. But I mean, to erect this tiny little chapel to Saint Margaret, who was a Queen Margaret, I mean, it's very, very small, isn't it? But cosy, I guess.
Absolutely.
And I don't know how many people must come in and out of here.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think over the years, nearly 1,000 years that this has stood here, how many people must have been in this space worshipping or reflecting or praying or having those moments to themselves. It's quite incredible to be able to stand in those spaces even today.
Do you know, and even the size, the height of the doors and everything tells you something about the history of the very people who were here.
Absolutely. You realise for a long time people were a lot shorter than they are today.
Yes,
more malnourished.
Smaller in every way, really.
Absolutely.
But this is beautiful and I love the sound of it too.
It's still really well kept. It's maintained by a group of ladies known as the Margarets. They are all called Margaret.
Well, even to this day, the ladies who look after this place.
They keep the flowers fresh, they keep the tapestries clean and all the rest of it. They are still known as the Margarets.
Is that coincidence?
I don't know, you'd have to ask them.
Yeah, they probably wouldn't tell, would they? But I mean, there was a Queen Mary who was only ever attended to by women called Mary, but
yes,
I guess
absolutely.
they changed their names.
Yep.
And is there any story behind the stained glass windows?
So the stained glass windows are more recent, they're 19th century, but they represent the various saints. So there's 4 saints, and then up at the far end is William Wallace, sometimes known as Braveheart. So representing 4 of the kind of saints of Scotland and one of the great warriors.
And even though this is a tiny little, it's almost a cave, those stained glass windows catch the morning light.
They do, and it's amazing actually.
Well, morning light over there, and I guess much more evening light.
Such a difference they do make. You realise how much darker it would be if we didn't have just these 5 little windows.
Oh, it's very beautiful. And so old. And of course it makes you think of the woman in whose name, the saint,
absolutely,
in whose name it is.
We'll make our way across towards Crown Square, which is where the royal apartments of the palace were.
This is the most beautiful quad. And what about that? What's that beautiful?
And so this is the Scottish National War Memorial, built in the 1920s, just between the First and the Second World War, designed by an architect called Robert Lorimer, and it has a record of all the Scots who died in conflict in the 20th century.
So lots of parts of the castle are add-ons over the centuries,
exactly.
Aren't they?
So one of the kind of strange things about it is that it doesn't have one solid period of construction. Because the castle was a major feature of the conflict between Scotland and England, at various times it was held under siege. When it was taken by an opposing force, the structures would often be demolished. So over its history, it's grown and evolved and changed and been rebuilt.
Where is the Great Hall then?
The Great Hall is this building in the corner of the square down here. Oh. And from the outside, it perhaps doesn't look terribly impressive.
No. I thought that was going to be the Great Hall.
Yes.
So this was his banqueting hall?
This was James IV's banqueting hall. And you really get a tremendous sense of the spectacle of this space.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, crumbs. It doesn't look like this from the outside.
From the outside, no. It's quite an impressive space on the inside.
Oh, my
Up above us, this really high ceiling is what's called a hammer beam roof. It's a 16th century structure supporting the roof without any internal columns holding it up.
Yes, that's what makes it look so enormous and fantastic.
And around the outsides, we have all this weaponry, all the suits of armour. Reminder of Edinburgh Castle's function really as a military base and as a military installation.
It's a brilliant hall, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And you can imagine great refectory tables and banquets going on.
And the smell of the food and the big fireplace up at the far end.
Yes.
Up towards the top right corner, you can see there's a little piece of ironwork. It's what's called a laird's lug, or the lord's ear. And it meant that when there were banquets being held here, the king could have someone stationed behind there listening in to any bits of conversation, keeping an eye out and keeping an ear out for anything that might be being discussed that would be significant.
That's actually happened because people would obviously gather here and talk amongst themselves, they thought. And they would be being eavesdropped on.
Absolutely. And into the 1980s, when this room was being used as a space for
meeting
leaders
world
from
figures,
around the world,
yes,
Mikhail Gorbachev actually wouldn't dine in here until he was reassured that that laird's lug had been bricked up and closed over.
Up there, the square thing?
Yep, that's it.
And somebody would be stationed
behind there, just listening in, maybe taking a few notes, keeping an eye on who's doing what. and then reporting back to the king
So
afterwards.
Gorbachev had even heard of that.
Absolutely.
And was a bit worried.
And very much played into the paranoia of the time.
Oh my goodness me, yeah. But this is a place that now, I suppose, the castle can show off all its armoury.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
And still used for various functions to this day.
Yeah, they still use it for various events and
You'd
book
want to.
launches and all kinds of special occasions. This is where J.K. Rowling launched some of the Harry Potter books.
Of course.
A proper magical space
It's
where she could
very
have the
magical.
children gathered to launch some of the titles.
Oh yes, I mean it has that magic, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
About it. And of course such a sense of history.
Absolutely.
So what year are we reminded of again?
So about 1510, 1511
my
for this.
goodness.
And then James IV dying in 1513.
Yeah. And so who then took over?
So in 1560, Oliver Cromwell, who had set himself up as Lord Protector of Britain, basically king in all but name, he'd fought the Battle of Dunbar, which is just outside Edinburgh, and then his armies marched on Edinburgh to take the city, and they took Edinburgh Castle on Christmas Eve, 1560. And at that point, the Great Hall here was converted into barracks spaces. So it was used for actually housing the soldiers, and then later was used as a storage room as well. So it never perhaps looked quite like this all the way through.
So the keepers of the castle, knowing that Cromwell was on his way and what he would probably do to the place, they must have sought to hide certain treasures from him.
Certainly, the idea of using the castle as a hiding space was something that has been used all the way through, even up to the Second World War. Some of the underground spaces beneath the towers here were used to house paintings from the National Galleries in London. The crown jewels at different times were secreted around here. So yes, certainly beneath our feet there are all kinds of remains of old bits of buildings where they would have been able to tuck away the things they didn't want the
There would
enemies
have
to
been
find.
a lot of things they didn't want Cromwell to see.
Absolutely, yeah.
Tell me about the crown jewels.
So, in the palace apartments, we have what are called the Honours of Scotland, which are the Scottish crown jewels. They're the oldest crown jewels in Europe, and that's where they're on display. They get taken out for state occasions, but that's where they're on display permanently here in the castle.
Now, the first I ever heard of the Honours of Scotland, I mean, I'm so ashamed, is during the recent coronation of King Charles III.
Yep.
And they were transported down to London for the coronation.
They were.
I'd never heard of them, but apparently they are older and much more grand than any of the crown jewels in London.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the features is also what's called the Stone of Destiny, which is the stone on which Scottish kings have been crowned for centuries. It's known as the Stone of Scone, and it is put underneath the coronation chair in Westminster Abbey for coronations.
And it was done this time.
And it was taken down for the coronation of Charles III, yeah.
Why is a stone so revered?
I think it was the stone that they used as a sort of throne almost for putting the kings on and sort of anointing them as formal kings of Scotland. And so it became this Stone of Destiny. It became the thing that was so closely associated with your royal kind of status.
And people coming around the castle can go and see the Honours of Scotland.
Honours of Scotland, yeah.
But I know they don't like us to go and film them
They don't.
particularly. It retains the mystique,
Keeps the mystery, that's
But
it.
it is amazing. I mean, something to be proud of for Scotland, isn't
Absolutely,
it? They've
very
got
much
the
so.
best.
Very much so.
Yeah. And possibly the oldest castle in Great Britain too.
Absolutely.
I have been looking forward to this bit because, like so many people all over the world, I'm fascinated by the story of Mary Queen of Scots.
Absolutely. One of the most iconic figures from Scottish history. And in fact, I often think of her as one of the most mythical figures of Scottish history as well, because there are so many stories and so many details around her life that people have speculated on for centuries. And it's one of the reasons why I think people are still interested in her, is that there's a lot of unknown, there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of imagination applied to the story. So she is a figure who still kind of draws people into Scotland.
Okay, so where is she in history? Who's her mother, her father? How come she is called Mary Queen of Scots?
So her mother and father, Mary of Guise and James V of Scotland. James V dies after a battle, and Mary becomes Queen of Scotland at just a few days old. And so that's where the story of her life really starts. And one of the reasons why people are drawn to her is that she becomes queen as an infant. She spends most of her childhood over in France, where she marries the Dauphin. She then becomes Queen of France when he becomes King of France. They're married just around about their early teens, and he then dies very suddenly a year or so later, and she is widowed in her early teens. She then returns to Scotland as an 18-year-old, and one of the kind of mythologies around her history is that there's a speculation that when she came back to Scotland as Queen, she actually didn't speak Scottish. She didn't speak Scottish, she spoke French. And one of the kind of stories was that she was sort of a queen that was foisted onto Scotland, even though she didn't speak the language.
Well, they would have resented that, presumably.
Absolutely. And also in the interim, Scotland has changed from being a Catholic country to being a Protestant country. Mary is a devout Catholic.
Yes.
So she returns to Scotland, possibly not speaking the language, certainly not practicing the national religion. And so she is this very controversial figure, incredibly beautiful. All the stories of her talk about how amazingly beautiful she was. So she had this kind of aura around her.
Now, what was happening in England at the same time? Elizabeth I?
So her cousin, Elizabeth I, is Queen in England. And one of the reasons why I think so many stories get told is it's such a sort of evocative period. You have two queens who are related, of two neighbouring countries, both of them sort of subject to the male courts that they are having to kind of try and control, both of them being subject to machinations and the kind of little manipulations of those courts.
And they're of opposing religions.
They're of separate religions. They've got very different perspectives on life. The two countries are two still very separate nations, although there is this huge tug to kind of try and unite them or kind of bring them under control together. And Mary basically poses a threat to Elizabeth. She is, in many ways, the legitimate heir to the English throne. And so Mary kind of threatens Elizabeth just by her very existence. And this is before the period where we sort of naturally assume that the throne passes from father to son or kind of along that family line. It's one of the reasons why there were so many contesting issues for kind of lineage, because it wasn't a clear-cut thing. And there would be people from different factions saying, well, no, I'm a cousin and I have claim to this and I have claim to that. And so Mary has this claim to the English throne through her family line. Her second husband, Henry Darnley, is also a cousin of Elizabeth I. Yes. He also has a claim to the English throne. And so it makes them quite a dangerous couple in terms of kind of the relationship with England. Darnley has a house in Edinburgh, and one evening the house that Darnley is staying in is blown up. Explosives that have been put in the basement, the house is reduced to rubble, and Darnley's body is found in the garden, having been strangled sometime before the explosion. Now, Mary is later implicated in her husband's death. And this is not just the Queen being accused of murder, this is the Queen being accused of regicide. Darnley is technically king. That's not a great look for a queen to have. No. And she would later leave Scotland to go down to England to try and get protection from her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. And to give her credit, Elizabeth keeps Mary very, very safe for 19 years.
Yeah, she keeps moving her around various castles.
Basically house arrest under various kind of estate properties. And after 19 years, she cuts Mary's head off. And that really is the moment that cements Mary's status. That kind of very doomed end, that sort of very romantic end.
An unhappy life.
Very unhappy life, very kind of tumultuous from drama, right from becoming queen as just a few days old, right up to being beheaded by her cousin kind of 42 years later. Her life is filled with drama and intrigue and manipulation and scandal, and that's one of the reasons that people are still drawn to her.
But she did have a son and heir.
She did. So in 1566, Mary gave birth to a son in the little room,
in this
very small little antechamber.
When you look at the size of this room, you wonder how on earth there was enough room to have a baby.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's tiny, isn't it? Yes. You can almost touch the walls just by stretching out. So this is where Mary gave birth to her son, James VI of Scotland.
Why would she have been secreted away in a little room like this?
So first of all, she'd fled Edinburgh to try and get protection. She was 6 months pregnant when her secretary, David Rizzio, was brutally murdered in front of her in her palace at Holyrood. Mary then left Edinburgh to get protection and returned 3 months later to give birth to the baby here in Edinburgh Castle, where she could be safe. And so this room probably represented the kind of ultimate safety.
It sort of underlines the secrecy, maybe, of the whole thing until they knew the baby was born
and that
safely.
It was safe and that it could be kind of cared for and protected.
Although there were rumours maybe that the reason she was secreted away is because the birth maybe didn't go well, or who knows? Absolutely.
There were speculations over who the father was. There were speculations over whether the baby actually survived the birthing process. And it's one of the mysteries around her life is that we'll never actually really know what happened in this room. But we can
Poor girl, to be so frightened. But I know she'd been frightened her whole life. To be so frightened as to have a baby in this sort of little secret hidey hole. But he was James VI of Scotland and the first of England.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when Mary was forced to abdicate, her infant son became king.
Yes.
And then later became King of England as well after the death of Elizabeth.
So like his mother, he became monarch just a few months old.
Yep, absolutely.
My goodness me.
Absolutely.
But isn't it beautiful as well?
It is. So when he became King of England, James moved the royal court away from Scotland down to England, and he vowed that he would come back to Scotland every 3 years to maintain the connection. He came back just once in the rest of his reign. And this room was actually redecorated for that one visit.
I see.
So the decoration that you see here was done as a celebration of his great return to his birthplace.
He must have walked in here and thought, this is where it all started?
Absolutely.
But 1566 is
1566, yeah.
I think this is my favourite room of all. It's beautiful.
Rather beautiful, isn't it?
It's like a domestic, friendly, great hall.
So this is probably where they would have spent the bulk of their time here in the royal apartments. This is where they would have had the day-to-day kind of life. A very fantastically wide fireplace to make sure these rooms could be kept warm.
Can you imagine when that fireplace is lit?
Absolutely. With this amazing crest above it, the lion and the unicorn representing the relationship between Scotland and England. The original crest was actually 2 unicorns, the unicorn being the national animal of Scotland. And then following the union with England, one of the unicorns was replaced by the lion, which is the national animal of England. So that crest, which you'll see in various forms all the way across the UK, the lion and the unicorn fighting for the crown, as it's sometimes described. If you look closely around Scotland, around Edinburgh in particular, you'll still see 2 unicorns.
So this is Jacobus Primus Britanniae. That's James I of Great Britain, basically.
France and Ireland.
And that says it all, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It just shows in this castle how you go through various layers of history. Everything changes as the monarch changes. But this room is absolutely superb. And the detail and the ceiling.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
And although the chandelier is a more modern one, you can imagine kind of that original chandelier lit with candles, creating a fantastic sort of atmosphere in this space.
So Mary, when she was Queen of Scots, and her son, when he did come back, they would have just enjoyed this as their room.
This would have been the family room.
Oh my goodness, isn't that wonderful?
What a lovely space.
Yeah, I love it. What's the story of this antechamber?
So this is a much more intimate space. So this would have been a more private space for the monarchy to have their accommodations in. Again, with a big fireplace keeping them warm. And in the room here, we have some tapestries which were done by Mary Queen of Scots. Through those long years of isolation in England, one of the things that kept her kind of engaged and busy was being able to do needlecraft.
That's what women did.
Absolutely.
In fact, didn't she form a friendship with almost her jailer?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she would have had very close relationships with the people who were looking after her. And I think there was a little bit of a sense that she was not a prisoner in a traditional sense. She was kind of a house guest. And she would be moved around through these various houses, perhaps not feeling so much that she was under a sort of house arrest, but was a guest of these large families.
Yeah, separated from her child.
Yep, she didn't see James after his very, very early years. She was imprisoned and forced to abdicate, so she never saw him grow up. She never had any kind of relationship with him at all. Oh. Again, a very sort of sad element of her life, that this one child that she carried, she never really had a relationship with.
No wonder then she formed a relationship, well, you do, don't you, with the people who are looking after you,
Absolutely.
Jailing you, if you like. So there she is, all those years being moved around from castle to castle, sewing to keep herself busy, I guess. And I know that they say every one of those sewing masterpieces tells a story.
Absolutely.
But meanwhile, missing her son, wondering what's going to happen to her and to him.
Absolutely.
What did in the end happen to King James when he was living in London?
Living in London, living a good life. He seemed to really integrate into the English society at the time. It was a much more diverse society than perhaps he'd had in Scotland. He had access to food and to music and to theatre, and he really kind of embraced that experience and had a good, long life down there.
And he was the king when they were plotting what we call Guy Fawkes Night, Bonfire Night, the gunpowder plot.
Gunpowder plot. In the early 17th century, not long after James has become king of England, there was a plot to assassinate him. And conspirators led by Guy Fawkes loaded barrels of gunpowder under the Houses of Parliament, and the idea was that they were going to blow up the Houses of Parliament on the day that the king went to open it. The plot was uncovered and exposed, but it really fed James's paranoia. His father had died in an explosion. Darnley's house had been blown up. He'd grown up in this very sort of paranoid world where he didn't know who he could trust. James literally wrote the textbook on witchcraft. He kind of very much bought into this idea that people were conspiring against him. And he wrote the book that taught us how to identify, persecute, and execute witches.
He literally wrote the book.
Wrote the book on witchcraft called
how to find,
how to identify, persecute, and execute witches. And that book became so influential, not just across Britain, but through Europe and into America.
Yes.
It all fed that kind of witchcraft craze.
I was beginning to feel sorry for him, but I'm not anymore.
He was really influential in his own way. He commissioned the King James Bible.
That
was still, in many ways, the default version of the Bible for many people. His kind of survival of the bonfire night assassination attempt gave us Bonfire Night that we still celebrate. Remember the 5th of November. His influence was much greater than his mother's in many ways in terms of the legacy that he left on Britain. And he's still someone that we perhaps ought to kind of think about and talk about in a way that maybe we don't.
I mean, this is basically the ramparts, yes?
Absolutely. So one of the great things about the castle is that it's this high elevated space that gives you this amazing outlook over the whole city and the whole surrounding landscape. One of the things that Edinburgh is quite significant for is its physical geography. There are 3 extinct volcanoes in the city centre.
Well, underneath us?
Underneath where we're standing. So over in the distance is Arthur's Seat, which is the tallest of the 3 volcanoes. It's about 250 metres above sea level. Coming across this slightly lower peak with various monuments and structure on it is called Carlton Hill. That's the second of the volcanoes. And then the third one is the one that we're standing on. So Castle Rock is the plug of an extinct volcano.
I'd often heard that the castle was built on a volcano, but I don't know whether I believed it until you just said it.
So the rock itself is around about 350 million years old. There's been a settlement up here on this space for about 3,500 years. So this is the oldest continually occupied site in the whole landscape.
Oh, it's a perfect place for a castle.
Absolutely. The whole purpose of this was about protection, defence, security. It gave you this outlook over the whole surrounding area. It allowed the early tribes that lived here this outlook that could keep themselves safe from any invading forces. And that really was Edinburgh's history in a nutshell: protection, defence, security.
Yes. So talk me through the geography. I mean, what are we looking at? And what's the expanse of water? And all the buildings over there and why we're over here?
So the water that boundaries Edinburgh to the north is the Firth of Forth. It's the tidal estuary of the River Forth running out into the North Sea. And that really is the northern boundary of the city. And then Edinburgh has 2 quite distinct sides to it. We have the Old Town, which is the bit that we're in here, along this ridge of rock where the Royal Mile runs, down from Edinburgh Castle. And then across to the north, the city expanded out in the 18th century. And this was what we think of as the New Town of Edinburgh. A lot of visitors overlook the New Town because the name puts them off. Actually, New Town was built just over 250 years ago. New Town by itself has 2.5 centuries of style and stories and architecture.
Yeah, anywhere else in the world that would be old,
exactly.
But here it's new. Goodness me. Okay, so now we're looking at some extraordinary skylines, actually.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, right out into the furthest horizons, you can still see little volcanic peaks all the way out on there. Carlton Hill has various monuments and structures on top of it. There's an old observatory building which they used for looking up at the stars in the 18th and 19th centuries. And then the New Town spread all the way down the hill to the north, all the way out to the Firth of Forth, filling in the space between basically Edinburgh Castle and the water.
And this road going down here is the very famous Princes Street.
That's Princes Street, so that's the southernmost street of the New Town. And one of the reasons New Town gets overlooked is that it's difficult to imagine it as it originally was. Today it is this commercial space. Princes Street is a largely shopping street with lots of hotels and restaurants and banks, but New Town was all built originally as residential property. So Princes Street would have been a residential street. All the buildings running out to the north still are quite grand accommodation, and New Town is still some of the most expensive private housing anywhere in the UK in terms of the property prices.
Moving right over there, you can see those peaks of the bridge over the Forth.
3 bridges, in fact, at that point. So St Margaret had established this ferry service across the water. That ferry service ran right up until the 1960s when the first road bridge opened. But there was a rail bridge, the Forth Bridge, which opened in the late 19th century, and that's the very distinctive red painted structure that runs all the way across. The first road bridge from the 1960s. The second road bridge opened just a few years ago. So it now means we have 3 bridges crossing the water there from 3 different centuries, crossing where people have been crossing for centuries.
Now, you can't walk around here on the ramparts without noticing this enormous cannon. She's got a name.
This is Mons Meg,
Right.
and named after the town of Mons in Belgium, which is where it was produced, and brought over to Scotland. It was a huge siege cannon, which they would take when the military forces were walking across the country. They could drag it around about a mile a day, was about as far as they could take it. So it wasn't terribly practical, perhaps, but the damage that it could do was massive. Look at the size of the cannonballs. I mean, these, they say, could be fired around about 2 miles from this.
Explosive force that would have been needed to fire those out of that.
Absolutely.
No wonder people were terrified.
And the cannon no longer functions. It, in fact, blew up. The explosive force broke the actual barrel, and so it was put out of use, and for a long time was just abandoned and neglected.
Now, there is a cannon fired at 1 o'clock every day.
1 o'clock every day, yes.
From the castle.
Since 1861.
Not from here.
Not this one, sadly, no. It's a more modern piece of artillery. They fired it originally as a signal to the ships out in the port of Leith, and that was a signal for the ships to set their chronometers so that they could navigate accurately. And they still fire it every day at 1 p.m. And that the port out to the north is one of the ports that serves Edinburgh for the cruise ships that do come in and bring visitors into the city.
It's the most amazing aspect here, isn't it? Really is. Thank you so much for showing me around. It is the most fabulous place.